Hey, welcome into Strictly Speaking here on True Blue. Chris PIEHOTA retired from the FBI in the role of Executive Assistant Director, one of the organization's 8 most senior executives. That's a big deal, a position he served in after working nearly 25 years as a supervisory special agent who led global national security programs and oversaw sensitive technical operations across the law enforcement and intelligence communities. Since retiring, he's been serving as executive leader, subject matter expert, consultant, and speaker through his own consulting practice based in Florida. And he also published a book just a couple of months ago called Wanted: The FBI I Once Knew. It's available on Amazon. And today we're going deep inside of it and the FBI as he once knew it and as the weaponized bureau it has become, and what it'll take to get it back. That's all coming up right here on Strictly Speaking. Chris, good to have you here, man. How are you today?
Great, and appreciate the opportunity to visit with you and your audience.
Yeah, I appreciate having you here. It's a fascinating topic that we're delving into right now. And I'm so glad you wrote the book because the FBI, the state of the FBI, and comparisons, to people who knew it as something else, even laypersons and regular old average citizens like me, we've all been reading and watching and learning about the differences between the FBI, the way the FBI used to be run, and as I said in my introduction, kind of the weaponized, corrupt bureau, depending on who you're listening to, that it's become now. So this is a perfect time for your book, and I hope everybody will read it. Let's talk about the FBI you once knew. When did you know you wanted to be an agent?
I was working in the Kennedy Space Center, the space shuttle program back in the early 90s. And I had gotten out of the military, went to work at the Space Center, and decided that I really didn't want to do that as a career, and started looking at going back into a more service oriented career. I was actually looking at going back into the military, and I had was attending officer candidate school for the Florida National Guard, and I was looking at maybe being a helicopter pilot. And I also was interested in law enforcement, so I applied to several law enforcement agencies, including the FBI. So I wanted to get back to something a little bit more service oriented. So the FBI came out of a 3-year hiring freeze, and they called me on a Monday and said, "Hey, are you still interested?" I said, "Of course I am." And they said, "Good. Can you be here this Sunday? We have a new agents class starting up." And I said, "Of course I can." And then I had to put the phone down, call my wife, and tell her what kind of decision I just made that was going to alter the trajectory of our lives. And that week I resigned from my job, pulled out of the Florida National Guard, drove to Quantico, Virginia, and began what was a 25-year career with the FBI.
So did you start that career just because that was the phone call you got? Because you said you applied to the FBI and several other law enforcement
Right.
agencies. If another one had called you, would you have been like, "Yep, let's go"?
No, you know what? I wanted the FBI because it was seen as the pinnacle of law enforcement. There were a couple of other ones that I had applied to that I wouldn't have minded being part of, but the FBI was my target organization for sure.
Did you just always have like a, I don't want to call it a thrill seeker mentality, but I mean, you're obviously drawn to danger. I mean, space, National Guard, military, FBI, law enforcement, you're getting, you're putting yourself in harm's way one way or the other. Was that just always a thing with you?
I don't know if it was that so much as they were interesting, but they were honorable professions. And I tend to be drawn more toward the duty fields than other fields, and it's also permeated my family as my son is active duty military right now. He's a Army Special Forces soldier, and my daughter was a uniformed police officer. So it kind of stays in
Wow.
in the family.
Yeah, good for you. Is your son a beret, Green Beret, or Ranger?
Yes,
Or
he's a
okay,
Green Beret.
fantastic. Well, thanks to him and to you for your service. That's an
Uh,
incredible background. So you go to Quantico. And do you know what your goal is there? Or is it, I'm going to put myself in their hands and they're going to shape me and they're going to direct me into what they want me to be, become, whether, rank and file agent, or did you have a goal of rising up in the FBI to, obviously one of the senior levels that you eventually operated in?
no, not at all. I just wanted to make it through Quantico without any kind of shortfall. I was looking at a career as a FBI career investigator. I wanted to be a special agent. And I submitted myself to the direction of the FBI on how they
Mhm.
wanted me to do things. And being in the military, you do the needs of the bureau, needs of the military, and you kind of go that way. So I put myself in their hands, and I was going to do what they wanted or needed me to do for the organization.
So this was around when? 2000?
I actually entered onto duty with the FBI in 1995.
Oh, 95. Okay, so you were 25 years since you've been out a little bit. Okay, got it. So tell me what the agency was like then when you went in. When a book title grabs you, the FBI I used to know is what I want back. Tell me what it was. Tell me what your experience was and are there comparisons to the military when you're talking about, the chief law enforcement agency in the country?
Well, first of all, the FBI I once knew, when I joined, it was still a mission organization. It was about protecting people, it was about enforcing the law. It had a set of formal and informal standards that the senior agents, I'll call them the old breed, that they enforced and policed assertively. For new people, they said, this is how you're going to do business in my FBI. So that's how I learned how to be an FBI agent, was from these old breed agents who put in the time to make the bureau legendary, and they weren't going to have a bunch of new guys come in and screwing it up, right? So I learned how to deal with people, conduct investigations, conduct the director's business for FBI matters, ranging from, dealing with street level people up through. I mean, there were times when we would meet with very high level executives and important folks, in the political realm. So they taught us how to do all of that. The FBI I ran into when I got there was one pre 9/11. It was still a cops and robbers organization. It was still the pinnacle or flagship operations were the criminal, violent crime, major offenders, the kidnappings, bank robberies. They took the marquee of the FBI investigative effort. So it was a different organization when I came in, and then of course leading up to the tragedy of 9/11, the organization made a violent shift into being a more of a national security, domestic security organization.
So that's an interesting description. So it was mission oriented when you started. That's the FBI you once knew. And
Mhm.
then it shifted into national security. What I would imagine the missions were somewhat national security as well, right? But what is
Mhm.
the difference?
Well, I say national security. What happened was is it was a law enforcement, primarily a cops and robbers organization. It changed missions into that national security, domestic security function. Again, a violent shift after 9/11. When I say the FBI was a mission organization when I joined, over time after 9/11, the FBI moved away from being that mission organization, kind of as you alluded to, had some, I guess you can say, parallel ideas to the military. Not a militaristic organization, but it had those same uh, values and beliefs.
Hmm.
The FBI changed over time after 9/11, where the leadership started being more conciliatory to, again, political influence and things of that sort. And they started running the FBI in a manner that was more consistent with corporate America, with private sector America. And they wanted to run the FBI as if it was Google or Netflix. And the FBI, again, was at its soul a mission organization. The mission statement of the FBI is to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. Those are things that you don't mix with corporate America leadership and management perspectives.
So,
And
so
that's
you
what
didn't.
happened.
So it wasn't really political when you went in the mid '90s, and
No,
it
not at all.
became. And it became. Now, was it solely because of 9/11, or was that just maybe the biggest of a number of factors that kind of shifted its focus?
9/11 was one of the primary factors because the whole FBI ethos changed over time, where the FBI used to be pretty uh, objective, apolitical, and they would fight. When people tried to push and shove or pull them in a direction, they would fight. And now you've seen over time where The FBI is now being accused of losing its apolitical or objective investigative position. And I think that's come with the change in leadership. Well, there are three things that I think changed over time. One is the operational culture of the FBI. The FBI had a certain culture leading up to and right after 9/11 of being a more of a warrior protector organization. And then over time, as the FBI changed, that shifted away from that warrior protector culture toward more of that corporate culture where people's feelings became more important than the core mission of the FBI, right? People, they wanted to keep people happy. And I
Mhm.
think that was a large strategic error on behalf of the FBI. The second area that changed was the leadership environment. FBI used to have leaders and managers who had steel backbones, and these folks just wouldn't buckle. And now you see a lot more things are negotiable, and we have a several generations of leaders who are more interested in being liked than they are as being effective protectors of our society. Third area that changed was operational practices. When I wrote my book, I gave a quick story about we went out and did a arrest at the Outlaw Motorcycle Clubhouse in northern New Jersey when I was stationed at the Newark field office. And SWAT team goes in, they clear the place, they back out and leave. We then take over and bringing them out, doing a search, and then having processing of the subjects. And as we had them sitting on a curb, they one of the guys said, "Oh yeah, yeah, we knew you were the feds." And so we looked at him and said, what are you talking about? He goes, "Oh yeah, we knew you were the feds. You treated us like human beings and you weren't assholes." And that's what they expected from us. Professional, squared away. You know, we treat them with respect and dignity, even though they're criminals, but they're still
Criminals,
human
yeah.
beings, right? But they're still human beings. There's no reason to be abusive or to treat them badly. So the operational practices have changed, and if you see now, FBI personnel showing up places very confrontational, wearing military gear, waving around M4 rifles at people who are scared to death. I mean, we're not going in and confronting violent criminals. We have women and children that are scared to death, crying and screaming. That's not the FBI that I grew up with. In fact, that was seen as being very, that wouldn't have happened back in when I was still, working cases and stuff, because that would have been seen as clumsy. That would have been seen as very just terrible that we didn't have the wherewithal as FBI agents to handle that with a little bit more finesse. So it
So
was
how did
culturally,
you
yeah, it was culturally taboo.
navigate it, Chris, from the beginning when you talked about the newer guys learn from the old guard,
Mhm.
the grizzled guys that you talked about, and the true professionals, apolitical, blah blah blah, to where it is now, where they're doing the stuff you just pointed out. They got somebody who was praying outside an abortion clinic, and they're going to be arrested, and they're
Right.
they're putting the red dots, at 2 o'clock in the morning on their foreheads, for crying out loud, waking them and scaring them, and flash banging and everything else. There was that intermittent period between when the shift was taking over, as you were really rising, right? Because you started
Right.
in '95, and you ultimately elevated to one of the top 8 positions in the bureau. So how did you navigate a changing FBI that was changing in a way you didn't like?
I remained true and I stuck to the principles that I was given and that I was taught.
The
And
old
I
guard.
did things a certain way, like the old guard. And there was still enough of the FBI, even in those intermittent, those, I guess you can say those middle years,
Mhm.
where that still was able to help me move through my career successfully. Right. There was still enough folks in management and in other areas throughout the bureau who still believed in that type of FBI. So I just I and I didn't never really thought to be a career climbing agent. That wasn't my thing. But after 9/11, the FBI had a large need and a vacuum for people who knew how to work in national security matters, and that's what I was doing. So it kind of pulled me into some areas that I quite honestly never thought I'd get into, and my career took off from there. And
So
I
I'm
never
just
buckled, but I never buckled. I never changed the way I did things. And it may have cost me some opportunities, but in the long run,
well, you did
did
fairly
fairly
well. Yeah, I mean, you obviously
right.
rose, whether that was your intent or not. Like you said, it wasn't really when you went in the goal of rising and so on and so forth. But I'm just kind of curious because when you say that the way it used to be is the old guard would teach the younger guys the way to do it the right way, and it worked that way, and it cycled that way for a very long time. What was the tipping point where people said we're not going to listen anymore to what the old guys had to say? Ah, that's old head
Mm,
thinking. We're doing it a new way now because generally speaking, it's if you've got a disciplined grandfather who disciplined your father and you got disciplined by your father, you're going to do things the way your grandfather did, right? That's kind
you're
of
right.
typically the way, it works. So in this regard, that stopped. And
Right.
that's why I asked before, was it just 9/11? What
No.
stopped the new generation of agents from listening to the way it was supposed to have been done?
Well, what happened was is later after 9/11, they made some strategic shifts in the bureau. One of them being hiring practices. They the bureau deprioritized the hiring of former military and former law enforcement personnel. And they wanted to have a more intellectual FBI agent cadre because of this new scary thing called cyber crime that was coming online at the time. So they focused more on those areas, hiring people with, scientific backgrounds or people in the, political science arena and things of that sort. Well, the FBI required that you have a 4-year degree. We were pulling people out of the universities, and the universities tend to have people who lean more toward the left and
Sure.
more toward liberalism.
That's
So we
reality.
started getting, yes, and we started bringing those people into the FBI in a proportion more so than the former military and former law enforcement officers. So you started seeing a change in the strategic makeup of the FBI agent cadre, plus the fact we were hiring, I mean, a large amount of people to become intelligence analysts. Well, where did they all come from? They all came from the universities.
Universities, sure.
So we started importing a lot of those more liberal, left-leaning ideas, and the organization didn't reorient them to the FBI. The organization capitulated to the new thought processes that were being brought in, which I again thought that was a strategic failure. But at the time, they couldn't see it, right? They thought that they were just, well, we have to change. We have to meet, and they were worried about keeping people and reducing, employee turnover and things of that sort. But what they did was they planted seeds for that new liberal left leaning mindset to start dominating over the course of several years versus the old guard, which the old guard started retiring. They were timing out, right? A lot of people don't understand this or they don't know it. But FBI agents, if you're a gun carrying agent, you must retire by age 57. You can't stay any longer. So a lot of guys leave in their early 50s.
Mhm.
So these
And
guys were all leaving, and they weren't there to train and mentor people formally or informally. So you have this new multi generational, multi ideological FBI forming, and the leadership didn't do anything about it. They just kind of wanted to keep people happy. They were moving forward with their corporate mindset. They started instituting climate surveys and all that kind of nonsense.
Mhm.
And then next thing you know, you have generations of leaders who were scared to make decisions, who were scared to make hard calls because they didn't want to get a bad climate survey. So you had this perfect storm of organizational, like a death spiral, right? And that's where people started then questioning everything. And then after Director Mueller left, Director Comey came in from the private sector, and this accelerated even further, where everything became negotiable. The chains of command were broken down. People could email Director Comey personally, which would have never happened under Director Mueller. People were horrified, to talk to Director Mueller because he was an old, prosecution Marine Corps officer, very stern man,
Yeah.
right? Where Director Comey was very welcoming, affable, always had a smile on his face, welcomed certain contacts from the workforce, which then created a chaos in the organization, and it just went from there. So,
When did the weaponization begin? We use that term a lot. It's in fact it's so prevalent that there's a subcommittee in the Department of Justice, in the
right.
House Judiciary, the weaponization of government subcommittee. I talked to Chairman Jordan, who chairs that subcommittee as well. And when did weaponization take hold? Was it with Comey or subsequent? Since Christopher Wray, or and what how do you define the weaponization of the agency or of the bureau?
Well, I think the shift toward what I would consider to be more of a partisan or a ideological position at first started under Director Comey. I mean, you could see in the news when you're looking at this off the books supposed operation that he ran, with President Trump and some of the activities that the Crossfire Hurricane and other things. You could see that culture had developed where we were going after people as an organization based upon politics or ideologies and no longer an objective enforcement of the law, right? So it started under Jim Comey, and then it just kept moving forward under Christopher Wray. Because I'll tell you one thing, Jim Comey, he was a good director to work under because he was just really an easygoing guy. Director Mueller, like I said, just a tough manager, and he was just this very stern man. Director Wray was more of a caretaker director. He came in after Director Comey was dismissed, and he didn't do anything. He didn't change anything. He was more of a arm's length, hands off, let certain people in the organization take more control and assume more influence on how the organization was going to be run than I think was healthy for the Bureau. And we used to get in big arguments. We used to get in fights about stuff like this. When I finally got up to the more senior levels, I would say, what are we doing? What is this? Because I still had that old agent mentality and training where some of these guys had bought into the corporate FBI mindset with spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations and climate surveys. So,
Where were
well,
you in 2016? I apologize. I'm trying to do the math in my head because
sure,
you served 25 years, so you started in 95, so that means you got done in 2020, right?
correct.
So what was your position in 2016, 2015, 2016 when Crossfire Hurricane was launched? And, everything that we know about it since that time is a little bit different. Of course, the dossier that was used to get a
Mhm.
illegally obtain that FISA warrant to spy on a presidential campaign with no predicate crime whatsoever there. Where were you in all of this, and did you just watch it happen? Did you push? Were you involved in the conversations, or what was your role?
Well, in 2015, I was the director of the U.S. government's terrorist screening center. So
Okay.
I was in the counterterrorism program area in 2015. At the toward the end of 2016 is when I was promoted into my last position as the chief of all, the FBI science and technology programs. I came in as Crossfire Hurricane was already moving fast. It was already moving at a very good clip, and I knew the people involved. And I had been acquainted with the deputy director McCabe for years, and I knew Pete Strzok and Lisa Page and those folks just from being around the bureau for a long time. So when you were talking about weaponization, I think that's when it really started to move in that direction, right? When you were looking at Crossfire Hurricane, and when 2016 is when at the end of 2016 is when I moved into my last role at the FBI, where I was in that very senior position. In 2015, I was an assistant director. In 2016, at the end, I became an executive assistant director. So that's kind of how the
So what
timeline
did you
worked
think
out.
of when you got up to speed on Crossfire Hurricane, and you found
I
out what you did find out, what we all eventually found out much later, obviously, you probably knew a lot more. What did you think when you saw that they were spying on a campaign with a dossier funded, by the way, by the rival campaign, by the other
well,
side of the political or the presidential election? I mean, because that's what made this so unusual, and the idea that the FBI would get involved in a presidential campaign to that level. ideologically driven was just, I mean, that was too hard for any of us to, too much for any of us to believe. And you were there when it was going on. What did you think when you got up to speed?
I thought that the case was being run in a vacuum, right? There were only certain people that were allowed to see and hear what was going on, which created the groupthink that the Durham report had pointed out. Right, there was groupthink among these folks. They all had a common thought process, a common ideological position, and they did they committed the mortal sin of investigation. They start with an outcome and then work backwards.
Yeah.
No, you investigate and then you look at what outcomes you get. So they had a set of outcomes that they worked backwards from. I also felt that the deputy director McCabe at the time should not have been overseeing that investigation. They pushed out some of the other more senior people in the national security programs who would have objected to what was going on. They were kind of pushed out, and I think it was run in a vacuum, tunnel visioned, and they lacked perspective. I think they allowed their emotions to take over. They lacked what I call emotional professionalism, which is what all agents have to be able to exercise. You can't let your emotions get involved, right? That's not what we're hired for. We're not emotional investigators. We are objective investigators. And I think that happened. They saw themselves maybe as historical figures trying to save the United States from the threat of a Trump presidency.
Mhm.
I mean, they didn't have a counterbalance to say, what are you doing? Why is this happening? You can't do that. And people who tried to voice concerns were too junior. They were just steamrolled over. And then the folks at the top did what they did.
Yeah. It's pretty astounding. And nothing like this you had ever seen before. I mean,
No, no, this
you
was
talked about,
uh,
but the politicization of the bureau in that regard had never happened before, to your understanding. It wasn't like it went from being they were on the right and then they shifted to the political left. It was no politics, apolitical completely, to suddenly we have this very strong left leaning ideology. We want to save, as you say, the country from this, this outsider radical Trump guy, and so we're going to do some things to help the other side. You'd never seen anything like that before.
no, not at all. And I'll tell you one thing: no organization or group of individuals is 100% apolitical, right? But the FBI had an apolitical culture, and we
Okay.
never talked about politics. We never talked about, hey, are you a Democrat or are you a Republican, or hey, put a Democrat on this investigation. None of that was ever discussed, and the old time supervisors would have crushed any anything that would have came up like that, right?
Okay.
So
So let's
yeah,
let's go a little further there, and we're going to talk about the old time supervisors and find out if the new supervisors, meaning the new director and deputy director, are different. But almost concurrently, I guess this is where the investigation is launching right now. We are finding out that concurrently with Crossfire Hurricane, Director Comey had started another operation, also investigating the Trump campaign of 2016. And what they're calling it now, this is literally, as you and I are breaking or talking, this is breaking, a honeypot campaign was started where basically two female agents called honeypots because their goal is apparently to express some sort of romantic or sexual interest in members of the Trump campaign. They were inserted to go undercover and spy on that campaign again. And this is what I want you to speak to, without any predicate, without any crime alleged or suspected, where they were going in to try to get to the bottom of a crime, the way an agent may be inserted into a mafia family or something. We know crime is going on. We're going inside to get to the bottom of it and get to the real core people. There was no crime alleged here. They were just going into a presidential campaign to spy on it, maybe for the same purposes as Crossfire Hurricane. What do you know about that?
that was a very compartmented operation that was overseen and sanctioned by former Director Comey. I had no knowledge of it. I had no idea what was going on, and and honestly, things like that cannot and should not happen in the FBI. You open investigations based upon predicate of certain national security issues or crime problems. That's the only way you open investigations. And he kind of did that on his own authority, off the books, so to speak. And that can't happen. That's not a workable model for the FBI, especially the FBI operates off of the trust and confidence of the American people, and you can't have stuff like that going on. So that was a bad decision, and it just shouldn't happen, right?
Yeah.
And here's the thing with that type of operation: the environment that they were doing this under was under the counterintelligence program environment. So when you send people into a counterintelligence environment, what you're looking to do with these two female agents is to elicit information. You're looking to form relationships with people so you can gather information, find out what's going on, possibly put yourself in a position of trust. And, I don't think the agents were asked to engage in any kind of, sexual activity, but they could use their charm, or they can use their, personality traits to get close to people, to then report back to, I guess the director's office in this instance, on who's who, what's going on, get some of the small talk, and start gathering intelligence on the inside of the Trump campaign.
And
So
all of this is off the books. As I
that's
understand it anyway, that's
that's what it
this
seems to
this
be.
investigation is just getting started. But as a matter of fact, the two female agents, one of them, I believe, was transferred to the FBI, or excuse me, to the CIA, and the other one was elevated to a position in the FBI. I don't know exactly what, where her clearance or what have you makes it impossible to interview her. They don't have to testify, didn't have to, be consulted about this investigation at all. So they basically made them almost unavailable for the true investigation to take place. Have you ever heard anything like that before?
No, that's not something that was standard FBI practice. And what you see was one of the problems the FBI ran into here was they started departing from the time tested practices and protocols that the FBI used to conduct its investigative work. Stuff like that just never used to happen. So they changed the operating environment, from the top down, isolated those activities. Like I said, I was one of the most senior people in the FBI. I had no idea this was going on. This was something they were running again off the books, so to speak, and only several people knew about it.
Well, we're only finding this out now because there's a newly confirmed director, of course, who is Kash Patel. And I want to talk about that a little bit because
Mhm.
obviously, when Christopher Wray was running things, none of this was ever brought forth. No one ever found out about it. But Kash Patel, it appears, given his past experience as a federal prosecutor and worked very, very closely inside investigating Crossfire Hurricane, he, as the saying goes, knows where the bodies are buried. He knows secrets about the way some things are done, which make him, if your goal is to cleanse the department or the bureau of a lot of the things we're talking about, he's your guy. If you're afraid of the sunlight of transparency being shined upon some of these things, you're going to fight to keep that guy out. So, Chris, they fought to keep this guy out. They delayed his confirmation and obstructed it in every way that they possibly could because they're afraid that he is going to blow the whistle on everything from Crossfire Hurricane to this honeypot thing to much much more. What are your thoughts on what we can expect from this director?
I think Mr. Patel is going to bring a new level of transparency to FBI operations for the American people and for our national leadership. I'm sure you've seen over time where the last couple of iterations of the FBI have not been completely cooperative with our congressional leaders asking for information. I think you're going to see that change under the new administration and under Director Patel. So, and I also think he came into the role with a desire to make foundational change to the organization. But we need the FBI as the American people. The FBI is a major part of the protective infrastructure of this nation. It's been led down a bad road, and I'm hoping that when Mr. Patel gets his feet under him a little bit, he's been in place all of a few days, and now he's also the overseer of the ATF. So
Right.
he's been handed some difficult orders to fill, and I think that you're going to see him And again, the new deputy director, Dan Bongino, they're going to be more transparent than you've seen in the past, at least in the past couple of years.
You said a short while ago that some of the old guard didn't like the idea of new guys coming in and screwing it up. They wanted things done, the same way, the traditional way. Well, one might argue, here's new guys. A director like Kash Patel, he's never been an actual agent. Dan Bongino's never been an agent. He's been a Secret Service agent,
Right.
NYPD. But these the new guys that they don't want coming in screwing it up? Because these are the new guys that are going to probably be responsible for cleaning it up, and pulling back the curtain on so many of these things that you're talking about.
Well, I think when you look at the new guys, I was referencing myself, the new agents.
Okay.
They wanted to make sure that the next generations of agents after them knew how they were supposed to conduct investigations on a technical level, knew how to behave, knew what the cultural expectations were for agents. I think what you look at when you see the very, very senior leadership change out in the organization, the old breed generally would look at that and say, okay, right, you do what you do, sir, in DC. We're going to stay out here, and we're going to fight crime, and we're going to look for spies, and we're going to fight terrorism. We're going to do all those things regardless of who's in DC. The old breed had that type of attitude, where the last couple of iterations of agents, maybe not so much. They were very much more influenceable by what happened coming out of Washington, D.C., than the older guys used to be. So,
So so
sorry.
there's some people taking non-traditional paths to really, really important positions here. And as a traditional guy, in your 25 years, I'm really curious, not just Kash Patel, not just Deputy Director Bongino, that they're all freaking
Excuse me.
out about because they say, well, the deputy has always been a career guy, an active agent, has been a career guy. And, here comes somebody who's not even an agent at all. And then also, of course, in the DOD, Pete Hegseth, he was a war fighter and a good one and a brilliant guy, with 2 Ivy League degrees and so on and so forth. But has never led an agency, much less a Pentagon with,
Right.
30,000 employees under him and that kind of thing. So there's some non-traditional people. Bongino goes from podcaster, his last job, to this one. Hegseth from the Fox and Friends thing to this one. So
Right.
how do you feel about that? It makes a lot of people nervous. Either that or they're just afraid of what these guys are going to uncover and reveal.
I think what you have is a little bit of a layered problem set. The deputy, I'll start with the Mr. Patel. The director is a political appointee, and he comes in and he is the protector of the FBI brand. He does all of the political business for the FBI, and that's been an accepted model for years. The deputy director, on the other hand, has always been a career FBI agent because the deputy director is the operations chief for the FBI. All 55 field offices report into the deputy director. All investigative work, operational work is under the supervision of the deputy director. And the deputy director is also the authority on forming and formalizing and approving FBI policy, practice, and procedure. So the FBI deputy director, from an operational perspective, is the boss day to day. The director himself is that strategic leader. The political appointee looks for the strategic direction of the organization. The deputy gets things done from an operational perspective, and that's where I think if there are any concerns with Mr. Bongino, it's that he's been out of the game for a while, and he was a Secret Service agent, from what I understand, had a good career there.
Well, 9 or 10 years in that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but he's been out for a bit, right? And I
Mhm.
think the concerns are, will he how fast will he be able to get up to speed to be able to be that final arbiter on certain operational or business decisions for the FBI? And I think that's where people have some concern, is that it's going to maybe take him a while to get up to speed. The FBI is a big organization, a lot of concurrent operational uh, activities going on, both domestic and abroad. And he's going to be in not only in learning mode, but he's going to be in rebuilding mode and in leading mode. So he's going to be filling several roles simultaneously while the
Do you
FBI is
know him?
still trying to do its thing. Mr. Bongino, no, I've never
Yeah,
made his personal
or
acquaintance.
or or
I've
or, or Director Patel. I just wondered if you had any experience with those guys.
I've met him in passing,
Okay.
so I couldn't say that I've probably spent more time with you than I have with either of those guys,
Yeah,
right?
the only reason I ask is I wonder
Yeah,
because you're raising what the concerns might be of somebody who's got to get up to speed and so on and so forth. Do
right.
you think he's capable of doing that? Um,
I
I,
yeah,
I kind of feel like President Trump thought this over very carefully. And talking to Kash Patel, who knows Dan Bongino very well, I feel like these guys have great confidence that he's going to be able to do exactly what you described has to be done.
yeah, and he had both of these gentlemen have the confidence of the chief executive, right? So it's not as if the chief executive put them in there and he's kind of leery about it. So
Right?
and plus, I'm sure the attorney general also has high confidence, or they would have voiced some concerns. You
Yeah,
know,
agreed.
the Pam Bondi. So I think what you see here is that they have this makes it very important for them to build a senior leadership team around them that will help them with the short term learning and operation of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and now, of course, ATF. And that's where these gentlemen need to form that leadership team so they know that they can get the day to day work done of the FBI where we keep our communities safe. And so in
Yeah.
the short term, that's where I think there are challenges. And if I don't have any concern with the personal character of either uh, Director Patel or Deputy Director Bongino. I think a lot of people are just more concerned about the short term logistical and operational challenges of not being familiar with the organization.
Let's talk about January 6th
Mhm.
because you and I last time you and I spoke, we started to scratch the surface of this, and you have a lot more intel and information you may be able to share. And I don't know if there's any you can't share about what happened that day. And I want to talk about the role of federal agents there. And this kind of ties to our conversation because Kash Patel and Dan Bongino have both been very outspoken in the 4 years since January 6th of 20, or January 6th of 2021 in support of the J6ers, saying that they're being given a raw deal, that they were set up, they were entrapped, and that a lot of federal agents within that crowd whipped them up into a frenzy to do things that they would not have done on their own. And now those guys are in charge. First of all, the J6ers have been pardoned, but that's not the issue here now. The issue is, did federal agents, were they dispatched? Were they infiltrating as agents provocateur that crowd of people that were there to chant, as President Trump told them to be peaceful and patriotic and make your voices heard? That was it, voices. Were federal agents sent in to to change that narrative and to make happen what did happen? Because it seems like this may be what Patel and Bongino want to get to the bottom of if they're really going to root out any weaponization in this bureau, right?
Yeah, on it from an operational perspective, any large gathering like that in the Capitol, whether it be an inauguration or the day of January 6th or anything like that, it is common practice for FBI and other law enforcement folks and national security folks to be in the crowd in plain clothes. They go there, that's regular practice, it's not new. They go there to make sure they're providing ground truth assessment back to command posts that are in place, and also to make sure that they're there to collect any information that might be helpful in identifying and mitigating threats. Right. So that's not a new practice that was just put in place on January 6th.
Sure.
As far as the there was also reporting of FBI confidential human sources, informants, in other words,
Mhm.
in the crowd, and I think they came out with a number, 34 or something along those lines. But the FBI says they were not there at the direction of the FBI to again participate operationally, but they went there on their own. They were going to be there because of the relationships they had. That's fine. As far as provocateur type of behavior, uh, that comes down. I wouldn't see any of the federal agents doing it directly. That I don't see that being something that happened. What I do see potentially is maybe some of the informants on their own initiative, outside of direction or instruction, getting involved and then having that appearance of trying to foment the crowd into doing things. That's a possibility. I can't say whether it happened or not. Nobody will admit to anything, of course. But I think with the new director and deputy director, they're going to take a strong look at that again from that operational practice perspective I mentioned earlier. Is that something we want to do or should be doing in the future as the FBI? So they're going to have to take a look at that. The January 6th investigative work, I think, was a misuse of priority and resources. If people were violent, then treat them accordingly. But the like second and third and fourth concentric circle of go out and find this person who was actually in Washington D.C. that day and used an ATM in the vicinity, I
Yeah.
think that was a mistake, and it shows how the leadership environment and the culture in the FBI had shifted over time. That would have never happened before.
How many agents are there active in the FBI at any given time?
Right now, I'd say between 13 and 14,000.
Okay, because that's what I thought I had read was the number was 13,000, and they committed to as many as 5,000 troops. I'm not a math major. I want to say that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 35-40% of the entire agency to investigating January 6th, doing, like you said, running down leads on the things like this, going to the banks and telling Bank of America, we want to see your records because we want to see everybody who bought anything in DC or in the vicinity that
Right.
day. And then we want to track their movements and see if they were near the Capitol so they can go after these people. So you say it was it was a, how did you phrase it? An abuse
Well,
of not manpower. I forgot how you phrased it, but it was certainly unwarranted and kind of wasteful and misuse of the resources that the FBI has. Why do you think they did that? You know some of the guys that were there, and why do you think they did that?
it came high. It came from on high. I think it rolled down from the White House to the Department of Justice to the Attorney General, and then to the FBI director and the deputy director. And then it was
So you think literally at every step that the president told his attorney general, who told the FBI director, who told his deputy director, who told the agents to go and do this. You think it literally touched every
it
level?
rolled down that chain of command. In the FBI, you're going to get that the director either concurs or poses no objection. The deputy director, the operations chief, tells the primary field office, which was Washington field office, open this investigation. We're going to do this, this, and this. And then the leads start going out to all the other field offices, for investigative work outside of the national capital region. So when you're an agent out, and like I said, I've used Oklahoma, and you're an agent out in Oklahoma and you get one of these leads and you're looking at this saying, this is ridiculous. What am I doing this for? And you get a lead that says, go out and do a physical verification of an address, take down some license plates. We want to and look and see who's in that vicinity. And we want to know, send it back as soon as possible. So you say, okay, I'll go out and do this. I think it's stupid, but I'll do it because it's not illegal. It's an investigation that's been sanctioned at the highest levels of the Bureau and DOJ. I'm going to go out and do this. He gets the information and sends it back to Washington D.C. Now he's one of those 5,000 people, right? So
So so it's not like, yeah, so it's not like they're all spending all of their time on it. So yeah, I get it.
correct.
And
They
and
were
that's a
running
that's a
leads in a
that's
lot of offices,
that's a
right?
fair
They,
point. But
right,
nonetheless, the fact that they were, I mean, it's one thing to go after and investigate and, if needed, if warranted, arrest and prosecute individuals who committed violent acts that day. But some of the
right,
stuff you're talking about right now, again, we're talking about nonviolent people, people who are charged with trespassing, people still had to get lawyers, people who still had to do they
mm,
this is what I think people talk about when they say the government has been weaponized against the people. There were people there that day who were doing nothing more than what they were what has been for since the founding of the country, standard practice, which is to show up in Washington D.C. and petition the government for a redress of their grievances, to protest. And that's all they were doing.
right.
And they were there to be a part of a protest, but because they were there when something more than a protest broke out, their lives were impacted in dramatic ways. That's not the role, is it, of the FBI? That's not the role of government.
No, and that's where I say that the culture changed, the leadership practices changed. And you can see where the FBI director, yeah, like I said, he was taking his orders from the AG, and everybody else was kind of trying to do what they were told the best they could. Now, there were some folks who refused to participate, right? So, they decided that for whatever reason, it was too ideologically far away from what they were willing to accept. So
Did
there
they
were
lose
some
their
folks who,
jobs? Did they lose their
uh,
jobs or lose, rank or status or anything?
I think it could have been career limiting. How's that?
Okay. Yeah, I get it.
And there
I get
was
it.
and there was one individual, he was a whistleblower, decided that he was going to protest, the use of a SWAT team, because he was a member of a SWAT team, to go out and more or less arrest a somebody who was cooperating, right? So, and then I guess he's been suspended, and they took his clearance away and all kinds of stuff. They have ways to apply influence in your career, right? And if they take your clearance away, you can't work. And it's not considered a legal, or I could say it's not considered an action that you can protest, right?
Right.
There's no adjudication or redress to
Appeal
having your
or
clearance
anything like
pulled,
that. It's just yeah, that's just it.
right?
What you this is a little bit outside of the scope of the
Sure.
FBI and the premise of your book about wanting the FBI back, but I'm just curious, given what you know about J6 and what happened there that day and about the confidential sources, and I think you're right, there's around 30 or so. The Capitol chief, police chief, by the way, said he thought there were 100 in multiple interviews, but I think they confirmed 30 something.
Well,
So,
well,
but
they confirmed 30 something on behalf of the FBI.
yes, confidential
Now,
sources, right?
there may have been other security or law enforcement or national security entities that might have had an interest that day. So I would say, just, I wouldn't discount that there could have been more government informants or government sources in the vicinity. I wouldn't discount that.
Do you think that it was a planned riot?
No.
And I don't mean by the rioters. I mean by some of
Yeah.
the individuals we're talking about here, because we keep going back to, President Trump, and it's on the record that he requested, look, we're going to have a big rally there to protest the certification of the election. And whenever we have one side, oftentimes the other side shows up. Antifa, we had
Right.
already seen clashes at Charlottesville and in other places. You know, so it was basically, he said, let's get some guardsmen there to buttress the security of the of the FBI, the Capitol Police and so forth. And he was denied that. And I'm thinking to myself, there's no way they wanted to have a riot, or else they wouldn't have asked for actual anti-riot personnel to be there.
Right.
But yet, it seemed like it was, just observationally from a few hundred miles away where I am, it seemed like they wanted that thing to get out of control so that something like the crackdown that has happened since could begin. Am
I
I
don't
just
think it was.
conspiracy guy there, Chris, or what do you see?
I don't. I don't think it was a manufactured riot. What I saw was a convergence of situations. You knew you had a volatile day. The optics in DC, according to the mayor and some congressional leaders, they didn't want that presence outside of the White House. I mean, I'm sorry, outside of the Capitol, right? So there was, I think, some layers of incompetence. There were some layers of bureaucratic indifference, and I think it converged with the volatility of the crowd to result in the January 6th activities. Now, one other time I was talking about this, and I said, look, if those people were looking to do a violent takedown of the United States government, they showed up with no weapons. They showed up. It was almost, to me, it looked like like an out of control, very aggressive uh, tailgate party gone awry, right? And if that's what the United States government could be disrupted and taken offline by, is that kind of group of people, then we have other problems. So,
I think you're
yeah,
spot on. I think that's a really good analysis of it. The only thing that again gives me more pause to consider the planned element of this is, for example, it's 4 years later, and we still don't know who planted pipe bombs where they were,
Right.
at the DNC and the RNC. We're talking about some pretty significant things that were like, if it was just a big party protest gone awry, as you just described, that okay, and the fact that there was no weapons on the premises there supports that. But why did they turn down the extra security, and why were there pipe bombs planted? I've been asking Congressman Jordan of the Judiciary this once a week for the last 4 years, pretty much, when he appears on my radio show, and he wants to get to the bottom of it too. And I'm wondering if the new director, the new deputy director, if this will be and the new AG, if this will be a priority to get to the bottom of.
It should be. If it's not, it should be, because it'll be a good first step in restoring some transparency and trust in FBI operations. So I think it should be something that if they don't know, and they honestly don't know, and they couldn't find out, then the new director and deputy director should be able to come out and honestly say, we have not developed the investigative information or intelligence to positively identify this person yet. So sometimes that happens. I mean, in many, many years, we had the Unabomber investigation going on, and it took a long time for us to identify the Unabomber.
But they found
So
him. But they found,
yeah, eventually,
we don't have a ton of time left here, but just let me chase a couple of other rabbits here if I can for
sure.
a second. They found the Unabomber. They find anything. They find everything. How is it that the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, couldn't find who brought cocaine into the West Wing of the White House?
Uh, you know what? That to me is that's a shameful situation. The White House is one of the most secure, surveilled facilities in our nation, maybe in the world,
Mhm.
and we can't figure that out. I think there's a matter. The question here is it can't versus won't, and maybe that'll change now with the administration in place, where Director Patel can come out and say, this is what we found, and this is what we've come up with, and I don't
Problem
know
is the
what kind
evidence
of
is already the
backroom.
evidence has already been destroyed, hasn't it? I think it's gone, and they claimed that
Well,
there were no fingerprints on the baggie. I mean, the White House, as you say, one of the most secure buildings, if not the most in the world. They have visitor logs. They know everybody
right.
who's there and where they are. It's surveilled, and you're telling me that some visitor got through all of the security that it must be. I've never been on a White House tour, but some visitor on a tour got through security with cocaine and then just left it sitting out in a place like that. It's incredible to me, and I wonder again. Your book is called "Wanted: The FBI I Once Knew." Would the FBI that you once knew have gotten the answer to this?
I would like to think so, yes, because they would have moved heaven and earth to find out how that happened. But again, you see some of the political wrangling over the past 4 years, especially. Uh, I just, it was a credibility buster for the Bureau. And I was professionally and personally kind of shamed by the fact that they treated it the way they did.
Do White House staff and family, do they go through the same security protocols when they go into the White House as a visitor would? In other words, do they get patted down? Do they get searched the whole 9 yards? Or is it because they belong there? They just kind of come to work every day, or family members come in every day and security says, "Hey, how's it going, sir, ma'am?" and so forth. Do they have to go through any of that?
Family, no, not, they don't go through the stringent security. The staffers have to go through security on the way in, to enter the facility. They go through the magnetometers. They have their stuff looked at. It's a regular protocol.
So in other words,
And,
we have our answer.
you know,
It was somebody in the
so
family because nobody else could have walked in and gone through the searches with a bag of cocaine. It had to be a family member, and I think we know where that's going. And I don't mean to drag you down there, but that's just
no,
what it
it's
is.
fine.
Last one for you, Chris. I'm just
Sure.
Mar-a-Lago,
Mhm.
the raid of Mar-a-Lago, the way that it was conducted, removing, turning off cameras, removing anybody from the building, going through everything from, as we found out, Melania's personal, bureau drawers and so on and so forth, to Barron's bedroom and everything else, looking for those documents. A lot of people I've talked to in Washington have said it's one of the most shameful episodes they've ever seen by an FBI with respect to the raid looking for documents. You're
Mhm.
you're such a respected 25-year veteran, senior elevated guy. How did you feel that was handled?
I thought it was. to say the least, it was ham-handed, right? It was not handled well. I think it was more of a circus environment. And as we talked about briefly last time, I knew some of the guys who were in charge and who were involved, and they didn't want to do that. They had no interest in that. And there were screaming matches between some of the higher ranking FBI folks and Department of Justice. Department of Justice drove that action. The FBI leaders did not want to do it. They strongly fought against it, but they were overruled.
So
And
Ray fought Garland against this. Is that what you're saying, or do you mean
no, I'm
lower
talking about
leaders?
the operational
Operational
leaders.
leaders. Okay, so they didn't want to, but they were doing this at the direction of the director, Chris Wray, or Andy McCabe, or right
You
from
know,
Garland.
you're looking at, I would, and again, I'm speculating a little bit, but that came from the attorney general to the director, then the director to the deputy director, who was Paula Bate, and then that
Oh,
was
that's right.
rolled
That's right.
down.
Thank you.
Yeah, and
I
then
was
that was
going back to
rolled
McCabe.
downhill. That was rolled downhill, and you know what they say about stuff that rolls downhill, right?
Yes, yes, I do. And so they fought it. They didn't want to do it. They
They
argued
they
that they
did
didn't
not
want to do it.
they did
But
not want to do it.
wow,
They thought
that's
it was a bad practice. They thought it was a bad precedent. And they said they had been in dialogue with the former, at that time, the former president, about those documents, and it was just an inconsistent also application of the law when it came to other people who had classified documents
oh yeah.
in their possession. And then, again, the circus atmosphere, all the pictures that got leaked out with the cover sheets and everything. I mean, it was ridiculous, and it was actually, like I said, it was a little bit disappointing that the FBI had kind of done it that way.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the thing that frustrates a lot of people, and a lot of people watching us right now, and they don't feel like the law is equally applied. As you pointed out, there were boxes of classified documents that a guy who had never been president was unable to declassify. President Trump could make at least a legitimate argument. I'm the president. I declassified them. That's why I have them. But the former president, who was then a vice president and a senator, had documents all over the place in offices and garages next to Camaros in a shoebox and these kinds of things. And there was no, as you call it, a ham-handed raid of any of those locations. It was just we trust him to turn over what he knows, and everything was okay. There's that politicization of the FBI that we're talking
Right.
about that I think you wish, and I think probably most Americans wish was not there. I wish it was the way it was when you were actually coming up through the bureau. So, last thing, what is your prognostication? Does it get better under the current leadership, and how long does that take?
I think you're going to see a couple of waves of immediate change. There may be some people that are excused from the bureau as soon as you know Deputy Director Bongino and Director Patel form a way forward. You'll see possibly some more dismissals. And also, what I see them doing is focusing on three areas. One, again, the culture of the organization. They have to fix the FBI's culture. They have to get the ideals, the values, and the practices back in line with what the Bureau was and what the Bureau should be for the American people. They have to look at the leadership environment and get those next couple of generations of leaders in place that are going to be properly mentored, trained, and oriented on how the FBI should serve the American public. And they have to look at the operational practices that are in place. Because I've heard also statements, well, we haven't changed our policies or practices. Maybe you haven't, but you're not surely enforcing them with the same perspective you used to. So you can have standards on paper, but when they're not being properly administered and policed, it really doesn't matter. So those are they have to stay in those strategic areas at first. You're going to see some cosmetic changes to the organization, of course. But what I say for the new leadership is you have to have action over words. You got to show the American people that this is the next iteration of the FBI, one that you can return your trust and confidence to. We're going to do things, not just say things. You're going to see a different FBI approach to things. You're going to see that stoic professionalism come back. You're going to see that skilled investigative work. you're going to see the FBI as an apolitical arbiter and enforcer of the uh, federal law. But I'll close with this. There are three things I think that the new leadership has to integrate to get things done. One, they have to look at what is the FBI obligated to do? What are they required to do based upon law, regulation, or policy? They got to make sure the FBI is doing what it's supposed to do. You saw earlier, we talked about briefly, they departed from a lot of FBI standard procedures and policies, and it took us down a bad road. So they got to make sure the FBI is doing what it's supposed to do. Second thing is they've got to make sure they look at it and say, okay, we're doing what we were supposed to, we're doing what we were required to do. Now we have to look at what are we supposed to do to make sure that we are protecting the American people from national security threats and crime problems. They're not the same. You can have a requirement, but it's not what you should be doing. So they have to look at that. And the third area is how do they meet the expectations of the American people and our national leadership? They have to integrate those three perspectives in order for people to really see a foundational change with our FBI, because the FBI, again, we need it. It's an important part of our protective infrastructure, and people want to trust that organization again. And that's where we have to go.
Yeah, that's a good checklist. That's a good to-do list, and I hope they are able to achieve all of those objectives. I want to go back to a time when people would see those blue windbreakers with the yellow letters on the back and say, "Yay, the good guys are here," rather than, "Oh my
Exactly.
God, hide because here they come for me."
Well,
That's
let me close the conversation with this, Dan. All right, I'm sorry. I'm looking at something over here.
that's
Uh,
okay.
the FBI operates in a world of duality, right? On one side of a coin, the FBI must be feared by our adversaries and by the criminal elements in our country. The FBI should represent a fearsome, snarling guard dog on behalf of the American people. On the other side of that coin, the FBI must be trusted and respected and revered by the American people as its protectors. And it has to be that same fearsome guard dog that you have no problem watching that same dog lay on the floor and play with your kids.
Yep,
And that
exactly.
same dog, if any danger was to approach those kids, that dog would protect them with its life.
There
That's where
used to
the
be no
FBI has
doubt
got to get
there
back to.
used to be no doubt that our guard dog was on our side and guarding us, but then it
Right.
turned on us to an extent, and now we don't know if we can trust it anymore, and so I agree with you. We need to get back, to that level of trust with our guardian, agency. Chris,
Yes,
we're
sir.
going to throw the book cover up there on the screen again and show everybody. Get this book. It's available on Amazon. It just came out in November. It's very, very new. Wanted the FBI I Once Knew by Chris PIEHOTA. Chris, thank you for your service in the Bureau. Thank you for what you continue to do to shine a light on this very important issues. And we appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
You got it. All right. Now, if you found value in the conversation we just had with Chris PIEHOTA and the conversation on the FBI, you know what your job is now, right? You want to go ahead and click like on this video wherever you're watching it, whether it's YouTube or whether it's Rumble, and make sure you hit subscribe as well if you're watching or listening on Spotify, so you know when we have great content like today's conversation coming your way. Thanks for watching Strictly Speaking on True Blue. See you next time.